Okay, so last time we got the binding channel cut onto this and we glued the fretboard onto the neck, and everything's dry, everything's good. I've been round the edge and just cleaned out the binding channel again with the router. Luckily I still had it set to exactly the same setting, so it's cleaned that up really nicely. So the next step on this is to get the radius on, and that means I have to break out another tool that's a survivor from my first ever build, and it's this huge, great big radiusing block. It's got some quite nice rough sandpaper on there, and this is going to be a 12-inch radius, so hopefully it won't take too much sanding to get it in. So we'll do a little bit of cleaning up. And I'll get this stuck down onto the end of my bench, which I know is relatively straight. I've checked the neck and the fretboard is in a nice straight condition, so this shouldn't be too much work, hopefully. And with that glued nice and firmly in place, we'll just start the sanding process. And I've been kind of rubbing away at this now for quite a little while, and we're getting close. We are getting close. I'm looking at this, and there is just the tiniest little bit in the middle, not quite down onto yet. So I'm going to just put some pencil marks all the way along, and we'll know once we rub those all off that we've got our radius rubbed in. Okay, and that's the radius rubbed in nicely. It's actually gone very well, and there's some quite nice figure on this fretboard actually. It does look rather nice, and I've been up and down it and checked, and we're kind of pretty much where we need to be with the radius gauge. So that's good. There's a couple more things I do need to get done though before we can move on with this. First is, because we've rubbed this radius in, our carefully cut fret slots will now be too shallow again. So I'm again going to just double check that we've got the kind of right setup on this slotting saw. I haven't changed it, so it should still be good. And we are, so I'm just going to go back and just recut those, and making sure that I'm going through the full kind of radius of the board. To ensure that the bottom of the cut actually follows the top profile of the board. And that way we can be sure that we're not going to run into any problems when we try and get the frets in. And that's gone quite quickly and everything looks great. This saw, however, does leave a little bit of a witness mark where the guide rubs against it. I've tried all sorts of stuff to stop that happening, but don't seem to be able to, so probably something I'm just going to have to live with. But it means that we're going to have to do a little bit more rubbing down on this board to get rid of those. But I also want to kind of rub this down quite a bit and kind of polish it up, make it nice and shiny. But I can't do any of that until I get the dot markers in. So the next job is I'm just going to retrieve my awl and my little fretboard template, and I'm just going to go back down this and kind of make sure that I can see all the little marks that I put in last time, to ensure that I'm going to get the dots in exactly the right places. Just like that, and then we can get a 6mm brad point bit on the job, drill down into there, break out some pearl markers and get them glued in. And there's no big trick to this, it's just a case of kind of gently drilling down so you're just a little bit short of the thickness of the inlay, and work your way along the board. It's just a case of a little drop of super glue, and position your marker. These sometimes have a good face and a bad face, so these are actually decent on both sides, but I always kind of check just in case. I'll put it in that way, tap it home. Quick spritz, move on to the next one. And with those all glued in now, it's just a case of kind of flushing them down, and then we can get to finally cleaning this fretboard up. And I've dropped back onto my other radiusing block simply because it's got some 120 grit on as opposed to the 60 grit or whatever it was I was using for the actual shaping. And just run up and down there. Until all of those dots are kind of leveled off nicely. Which we seem to be. So with that done, I'm now going to grab some finer grits of sandpaper and just kind of work this right the way down until we get a nice shiny finished surface on it. So I'm going to go with 180 first, and I'll just stick it on that little block. And some 240. And I'm trying to put all the pressure on the front end of this block, so I'm not catching it with the 120 grit and undoing the work that we're doing, and it seems to be working. So I'm going to finally go with some 400 in this grit. Which is starting to give us a nice finish. So now, because we're not going to be taking any great amount of material off anymore with the sandpaper, we're just going to be kind of like refining the surface. I'm going to switch to a normal flat block and start to work my way up with some 600 right the way through the grades until we get to probably, I might even use some Trizact on this just to really give it a nice glossy finish. So I've just got a 600 sanding pad, and then I've got some 600, 800 and 1200 super acrylics. And I've grabbed that primarily because it was handy. And just a last rub with the 1200. You can see the pearl markers are polishing up beautifully now. And then just as a final bit of overkill, I've got some 3000 and 6000 Trizact pads, which I'm just going to use dry in this instance. You normally put a bit of moisture on them, but we'll go dry on this job. I don't want to be putting anything onto this fretboard that's going to cause an issue. And then just to get the the dust out of the grain, I like to just give it a bit of a quick flash over with some super glue activator. Seems to work really well. Just pulls that final bit of dust out of there. And we'll just pull this off the bench. And hopefully you can see there, that is an absolutely beautiful finish on the board. So very happy with that. Now with all this done, the next step would logically to be thinking about getting this binding in place. However, I'm still a little bit unsure about what's going on here. So I think to get this element into its final shape so we can make a more kind of informed decision about what we're going to look like here, I need to thin this headstock down and get the transition done. So that's going to be my next job. However, that's a little bit too much for this episode, so we'll leave that for next time. So as always, don't forget to hit the like button if you've enjoyed this, subscribe if you haven't already done so, and I'll see you in a few days' time. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye-bye.